friends, welcome to our channel. Here we talk about things that you may not even know yet, so if you have any questions, there's an answer. So if you are new to our channel, don't forget to click the subscribe button and hit the notification bell to stay updated with new upload videos. The discovery of rubber uses of rubber date all the way back to the 1600s, when the Mesoamericans used it for small things, such as balls for entertainment, and a type of temporary rubber shoe that was made by dipping their feet into a latex mixture. However, the year that is better known for the discovery of rubber is 1735, when the French scientist Charles de la Condamine discovered it during an expedition to Peru. After he discovered it, he sent back the remarkable new rubber samples to the Académie Royale des Sciences in France. He spent the next 10 years exploring Peru and the rest of the Amazon. In 1745, he returned to Paris, and in 1751 Charles's journal Du Voyage fait par ordre du Roi was published with all his adventures and discoveries from Peru, which included the uses, properties, and importance of his newly found substance of rubber. Condamine's paper is known as the first scientific paper on rubber. Rubber got its name, rubber, in 1770, when in England a man named Joseph Priestley discovered it could be used to rub off pencil marks on paper. The recognition for the many uses of the newly discovered commodity exploded from a great number of scientists and inventors who began discovering new ways to utilize the material and improving ways of production of the rubber. South America was a major source of the rubber that was used in much of the 19th century. Rubber soon spread all over the world, starting its large spread with a man named Henry Wickham when he gathered the seeds from the rubber-producing trees in Brazil and germinated them in England. The seeds germinated in England were then traded and exported all over the world to places like India, Sri Lanka, Singapore, Indonesia, and Malaysia. During this time, Congo, Africa was also a large producer of the trees used to make rubber, therefore made them large producers of the rubber as well. Once the value of the commodity was apparent, the world became hungry with greed and desire for the chance to export and make profit from it. This development of the rubber growing industry has not been without drawbacks. Overproduction had seriously affected the industry financially by 1950, and many attempts have been made to regulate its supply. The quick realization of the economical importance of rubber resulted in suffering of a lot of the world's economies. This downfall was due to the reality of production becoming an unhealthy monster of a desire, and because the vulcanization of rubber changed the way the world preferred and produced the commodity. The war years 1914 to 1918, rubber tires and the wheels of victory, while in the United States motor vehicles were poised to conquer a great part of the country's transportation system during the decade before World War I. The strategic planning of the German High Command mainly relied on railroads. The importance of trucks for mobile warfare was recognized only in the second half of the war, when it was already too late to build up strategic reserves of oil and rubber. During the war, U.S. truck and tire production largely outnumbered that of the Central Powers. For many strategic raw materials, the German Empire was highly dependent upon imports. In 1913, the foreign market share for saltpeter, petroleum, and rubber nearly reached 100%. In the meantime, Great Britain had almost the entire rubber production of Southeast Asia under her control. After the outbreak of the war, Germany managed to buy rubber on London markets through neutral intermediaries, which found their way to the Reich via the Netherlands, until England stopped this practice in October 1914. With the help of this contraband, industrial rubber needs could be met for 1 year. From autumn 1914, the Central Powers were practically cut off from the international rubber market until the end of the war. The German Empire tried to make up for this loss by using synthetic and recycled rubber, caoutchouc regenerate. The tire industry was subordinated to a state administration. After the beginning of the war, the German tire producer Continental had to cope with the loss of about 75% of its workers, who had been enlisted into the army. Nevertheless, it could benefit from its quasi-monopolistic position to enforce a 25% price increase for its products. Due to the lack of rubber, German trucks had to drive on iron tires in the last years of the war, which reduced their usability on muddy terrain and decreased the endurance of their motors and coachworks. In 1916, the U.S. car industry was subjected to a central coordination to make it fit for war. For this purpose, the Council of National Defense created the Motor Transport Committee, led by Alfred Reeves. The output of the U.S. car industry grew continuously during World War I. In 1914, it produced 543,000 units. In 1917, 1.75 million, with 25,000 exemplars of his Model T. Henry Ford, 1863 to 1947, headed the list of cars used in the European war theater. Between 1914 and 1918, the French industry contributed 65,600 cars and trucks to the Entente's military effort. Beginning in 1915, the British Associated Equipment Company managed to produce 40,000 military motor vehicles per year. The Italian car company Fiat Turin reached an annual output of 16,500 units in 1918. The motorization of the Entente's transportation system would not have been possible if the tire production had not kept up with the car industry's demand. While the German competitors were thrown out of the market, the Big Four of the U.S. tire industry brought most of Britain's Southeast Asian rubber production under their control. The threat of German submarines was a good argument to redirect the whole caoutchouc stream to the east, which in times of peace went westward to London. From then on, most of the rubber took the Pacific Road and the cargo was directly sent to U.S. harbors. During the war, the U.S. share of global rubber purchases rose from 40% in 1914 to about 70% in 1918. Following the example of the car industry, the U.S. tire industry switched over to war production. Goodyear, Akron, Ohio fabricated truck tires daily production in 1,918 to 4,000 units, but also 715,000 gas masks, balloons for military reconnaissance and blimps for the anti-submarine warfare. To meet the growing rubber demand, new railroads were built in British Malaya and the clearance of tropical forests was accelerated. Thus, the war had considerable ecological consequences in this colony. Gas masks. In April 1915, German troops used toxic gases against their enemies for the first time near Ypres, Belgium. From then on, all involved nations had to face the threat of chemical warfare and find appropriate means to protect their soldiers against this horrifying menace. During the war, gas masks, which began as provisional arrangements, became a more and more sophisticated piece of military equipment. Rubber-coated textiles were gas-tight and in principle the only material suitable for masks protecting the front soldiers. The German Army's gas mask GM-15 mainly consisted of this kind of tissue, which had initially been conceived as the Zeppelin skin. Soon, the rubber scarcity showed its effect. Most caoutchouc parts of the German gas masks had to be replaced. The models GM-17 and GM-18 mainly consisted of leather, rubber and sexual hygiene. The mass armies of World War I consisted almost entirely of men staying away from home for long periods of time. When the fronts began to freeze and the conflict became an imbroglio with no end in sight, the sexual hygiene of the troops became a matter of growing concern. According to Alfred Blaschko, 1858 to 1922, the spread of sexually transmitted diseases (STD) among European armies was already high in peaceful times. Germany, 2.6%, France, 4.2%, Italy, 8.5%, UK, 17.4%. During the Franco-German War of 1870 to 1871, A random sampling showed that the contagion rate of an army corps from southern Germany jumped from 3.3% at the beginning of the war to 77% when hostilities ended, too, after 1914. Similar developments had to be feared in all involved armies as the war went on. Brothels could be found in large numbers behind the front and nearby garrisons in the hinterland and were frequented by officers and soldiers despite all moral appeals by the authorities. A specific invention made by the rubber industry before the war had the potential to reduce the spread of STDs. The first rubber condoms, which had a continuous semen, were still not considered to be very reliable, were probably invented by Goodyear engineers. In 1912, the German industrialist Julius from 1883 to 1945 discovered a diving technique to produce a seamless sheath and thereby found the solution still in use today. Competing contraceptives, moral reservations and caoutchouc scarcity obstructed the quick spread of this innovation among the Central Powers. Nevertheless, Fromm's invention found its way to the front lines. In many cities, the moral police, Sittenpolizei, obliged the soldiers' trumpets, Soldatendirnen, to use condoms. Military hygiene on the Entente side witnessed a similar development. The war worked as a catalyst for new contraceptives. Above all in the countryside, from which many soldiers from the diverse nations came, contraception was surrounded by religious taboos. The front soldiers' communities did not have much respect for this sense of shame and invited the peasants' sons to give up their moral retention while on leave in the recreation zones of the hinterland. When the war was over, the survivors popularized Fromm's invention in the countryside. Synthetic rubber. Shortly after the turn of the century, the German chemical industry intensified the search for substitutes for natural rubber in order to reduce the country's dependence upon imports. Bayer, active in the field since 1906, developed a method to polymerize isoprene and dimethylbutadiene, which allowed the production of synthetic rubber with varying degrees of hardness. In 1912, German researchers presented the first automobile tire made of artificial caoutchouc at the International Congress of Applied Chemistry in New York. But many practical obstacles still prevented its mass production. The German synthetic rubber became brittle after a short time of use and was not competitive with its natural counterpart under peacetime conditions. Continental gave up the production of synthetic tires in 1912 and Bayer retreated from the market a year later. The outbreak of World War I was a strong incentive for both enterprises to return to these formerly unpromising undertakings. Methyl rubber was used to fabricate truck tires, which had to be replaced after 2,000 kilometers. If the German industry managed to produce some thousands of tons of synthetic rubber during World War I without ever meeting military demand, it nevertheless pushed forward the research for caoutchouc substitutes so that the production of synthetic rubber on an industrial scale could start in the 1930s. Buna, Schkopau. The Third Reich largely benefited from this search for substitutes when a new period of wartime autarky began in 1939. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our channel and hit notification bell to be updated on our latest videos. Thank you for watching.